welcome to the National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. This podcast is brought to you through the generous support of the Albert and Ethel Hertzstein Charitable Foundation. Each week, our in-house experts sit down with special guests to discuss depictions of World War II on film. Sit back and get ready for a lively debate that will reveal the good and bad of how Hollywood shows the 20th century's most dramatic event. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And our special guests for today's episode are Josh Schick, curator here at the museum.
Hello, Seth.
Kim Geis, assistant director for curatorial services at the museum.
Hi there.
And Service on Celluloid veteran, Mike Scott, film critic and friend of the show.
Always happy to come play with you guys.
Today, we'll be discussing the 1957 epic, The Bridge on the River Kwai. Film is set in a British prisoner of war camp deep in the jungle in 1943. New prisoners arrive in the camp whistling a happy tune as they march into captivity, unaware as to what lies before them. What lies before them, of course, is the construction or forced construction of the Burma Railway and a bridge over the aforementioned River Kwai. Led by a rigid and upper-crust commanding officer named Colonel Nicholson and one lone American named Shears, the POWs and their staunch commander endure much as they attempt to build a rail bridge in the middle of the jungle. The Bridge on the River Kwai stars William Holden as Commander Shears, Alec Guinness as Lieutenant Commander Nicholson, Jack Hawkins as Major Warden, Sesshu Hayakawa as Colonel Saito, James Donald, Jeffrey Horn, and many more. Kwai was directed by David Lean, produced by Sam Spiegel, and written by Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson based on the book of the same title, written by former POW Pierre Buell. The film was widely praised, winning several Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Alec Guinness, Best Screenplay, Editing, Music, and Cinematography. So it was actually rather successful, quite obviously. Well, as we always do, and Josh, I'll start with you because you're sitting next to me. In your opinion, how accurate is the bridge on the River Kwai?
Overall, not very accurate to the whole story. Brings it to life, lets people know that it happened. That was great, but overall, a lot of the things that I sit there and start picking it apart, especially after the second, third time watching it, not crazy accurate.
What about you, Mike?
Yeah, but my understanding is that it's very loosely based on real events. There was a Burma Railway, what would they call it, the Death Railway or something like that, Railway of Death. But obviously, you know, Hollywood has its way of taking real things and taking some liberties just to help audiences stay involved in it, I suppose.
Pearl Harbor. Kim, what about you? What's your opinion?
Yeah, exactly. It was based on real events. Some of those things actually happened, but in terms of the POW experience, not very accurate. But I came across a quote from David Lean, actually. It was a little interview bit where he said, you know, reality on the screen is sort of a bore. And, you know, movies are kind of dreams and they should have an unreal edge to them. So after, you know, hearing him say that, I watched it in even a different way.
Well, I disagree. Mm-hmm. I think if you're making
with me or David Lean?
David Lean, not with you, because your opinion is, I think, is similar to everybody else's here. Is that this movie is not accurate at all? Well, not very accurate. There's parts of it that I think are somewhat accurate, but the overall film is not. I think having, you know, a fantasy or whatever it was that David Lean said is fine if you're doing, you know, Pinocchio. But if you're doing a movie that's supposedly based on actual events, it needs to be, or it should be, as close to real as humanly possible. And this movie just, it ain't.
That's tough to swallow, too, if you say, it should have some fantasy element to it when it's, especially this subject, very real, very rough, and it does a very big disservice to kind of what happened for him.
I think at best you can say it's truth adjacent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nuggets.
Yeah,
Nugets. It was written by a Frenchman. Anyway.
So sort of.
Yeah, kind of. Well, I mean, it was a work of fiction.
Yeah.
You know, the book was a work of fiction based on his
experiences.
Some of his experiences.
And he says that it's probably in reaction to people saying, well, you weren't there, you wouldn't know. It's work of fiction. And I think the director does the same thing as well when he kind of gets called out on a little bit too. They're like, it's, you know, it's just supposed to tell a great story.
Well, that's convenient.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to it. Let's start picking this sucker apart. The main thing behind, the title of the movie is The Bridge on the River Kwai.
It's the main character too, isn't it?
It is indeed. The bridge is the main character. Was the building of the bridge an act of collaboration? And this is kind of a theme to me that ran through this whole movie, literally from the time they pull Nicholson out of the oven, or what he calls the oven, until the end of the movie. This is a theme that's running through my brain the whole time. What's your opinion on that, Mike? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely, it's collaboration, and I know that prisoners of war are expected to work, to be put to labor, but I'm not so sure that they should embrace it so wholeheartedly as Nicholson did. And he even had some exchanges with some of his men who, were
Clifton.
Yeah, that's right. Who's winking at him, and he's willing to sabotage, and they're playing around before Nicholson comes out of the oven to take control of the project. But him, bringing his engineers in to find a better place to cross the river, and because you'd never get this bridge done here, let's do it down there. That's clear collaboration. You're not just doing what you're being told. You're offering advice to do it in a better way. So I think there's no question, and that's kind of gets to the core of the movie, and I think that's why Alec Guinness's character is so fascinating, is because he's doing something out of pride, out of national pride and self-pride, that works entirely against his best interests and against the best interests of his country and against the best interests of the Allies.
I think it's the manner in which they build the bridge. And you look at the actual project, there was over 680 bridges built along the length of this railway, but it's the manner in which, and the enthusiasm and the nationality behind it that he gets behind and says, oh, we're going to build this, best darn bridge you can find on this side of Thailand.
A proper bridge.
Yeah, proper bridge.
There's
Very
even
British.
one part where somebody suggests that the bridge will last for a few hundred years, and Nicholson's like, oh, wow, do you think?
He's wowed by that.
Yeah.
It's the willow piles of London Bridge. And he goes, that could be here forever. Like, dude, you're tying it together with rope.
With the plaque and everything,
That's right.
Yeah, I agree. This is a complete act of collaboration. The fact that he, willingly takes command of this project, from the Japanese, which would never have happened in reality. The Japanese, in reality, the Japanese had been surveying that territory to put the real bridge since 1937. So they knew where they were going to put the bridge. They did not need British engineers or Dutch or Australians or Americans, all of which were in this camp, to help build them this bridge. That was not necessary at all. They just needed the manpower to do it. And the fact that he takes over the project and does it with such zest and zeal is that's certainly collaboration to the highest degree.
I read John Cost's book, an actual account of it all, kind of preparation for this, and he mentions it once in the book very quickly. The only account that I can find of British officers saying, hey, we'll build a bridge, is this one officer convinces the Japanese that he and his group can build a small bridge in a week if they're left alone to it. But he found ways for things to keep breaking or it ended up taking weeks and even months to build this one bridge that he'd convinced them to let them take it over with. It's about the closest in truth I can find.
I think that's what you'd expect, though, right?
Totally. Yeah. Well, in you guys' opinion, is the attitude and the physical condition, and this kind of relates to what we just talked about, of the POWs a close example of what they would have been like working on the railway? Kim, I'm looking at you. What do you think, Kim?
No, it was not. If you read any account or see, sketches that former POWs did of what life looked like, it didn't look like that film. So especially in the scenes where they're building the bridge and some of them are like jumping off the pilings into the water, or,
they're frolicking.
They're kind of, swimming around. And that was certainly not the case. There were perhaps elements, moments that may have resembled, the experience.
I'm sorry.
No, but, even finding actors that could, fill these roles, I think was difficult at the time.
Yeah, because the real guys were emaciated.
Yeah.
Right.
And, reeked with, dengue fever and beriberi and all kinds of different things. There's a scene in the beginning, or very, very close to the beginning. Actually, I think it is the beginning, when the camera pans along really close to the ground, and you see that they're building a railway. You see the train tracks and everything. And you see all these guys from, basically the knee down.
Right.
And those guys look pretty rough.
Yeah.
They're filthy. A lot of them don't have any shoes. Their pants are literally tatters. If they have any pants at all, some of them are wearing the loincloth kind of a thing.
Sure.
And I mean, that to me, I was like, yeah, those guys look like they may have just gotten to the camp a couple weeks ago, and they hadn't been there a while. And then there's another scene where they're lazily swinging picks and axes and sledgehammers or wood shovels or whatever it is they're doing. They don't have any energy at all.
Yeah, they're hardly. I noticed that too.
Yeah,
when they're just sort of going through the motions a little bit.
They're just barely getting it done.
Yeah.
And that's right at the beginning. That's before Nicholson takes quote command unquote of the camp for all intents and purposes and the project. And I think that was actually probably fairly realistic, again, to new people who would have arrived in the camp, not the guys who'd been there for 6 months, because, they were walking skeletons at the point.
William Holden's looking pretty sharp when
He's always very barrel-chested. I mean, how do you accurately portray that experience on film, of a starving person? Or, if you look at the POW experience or, at the Holocaust in film, how do you show that in a way that mimics real life? I don't know.
I think you get close.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the closest they come is it might be the very first shot of the movie, where they show the railroad and right alongside of it graves.
Yeah.
And then William Holden's character's whole detail is burying people.
Yeah.
And they're used to just burying guys, and so at least it touched on it there in the very beginning, and then gets away from that.
Yeah, you don't really see that again.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I
John.
think you get the look you get is at the very beginning. I kind of call it their salute to the other 200,000 people that died building it. Is they kind of run over when they're going through that first etap, that first hut. They show some locals. They say Burmese, Thai, Indian, and there's some really skinny guys there that are probably from local population that they recruited for the movie. That they're about the most emaciated people you can see. And then there's the hidden hero to the movie, the ceiling fan guy.
Right.
Those are probably about the only people that maybe look almost the part. Everyone else is just they're a little bit too happy, a little bit too kind of thick and doing okay for being up on the railway. I don't think there was a timestamp for this, was there? It's just kind of Death Railway.
Well, it's supposed to be 1943.
42 to 43, right?
Yeah. I think it's supposed to be early to mid 43 is actually theoretically what it's supposed to be. But again, being a work of fiction, you can kind of take that for how you will. But it's obviously after the fall of Singapore. That's where all the Brit prisoners came from, and what's his name? Holden came from the Houston, so this is after 42. So you got to figure it's going to be close to 43, mid 43, something like that. But regardless of that, it's these people would have been in prisoners of war camp for some of them for over a year. And when was the Houston sunk, Josh? It was in 40
straight. Yes,
February 42. Okay, so I mean, again, even Holden's character theoretically would have been in camp for a year-ish.
Yeah.
Maybe a little more. And they wouldn't have looked like that. And I agree with you, Kim, 100%. I mean, without putting actors at risk of physically dying, it's going to be very hard to do that.
Unless
I
you're
agree.
Christian Bale, right? No. Where you go in and lose, I'm going to lose 150 pounds or, half my body weight.
And it works to get them all dirtied up and they all look tan and everything. They all had too much clothing on, too. Should have just had,
Anyway.
What kind of movie are you watching?
Jeez. All right. So let's talk about Alec Guinness. What do you think of his performance or the character? Let's talk about the character of Colonel Nicholson, because Alec Guinness was a fantastic actor. Lawrence of Arabia, he was a fantastic actor. But let's talk about the character of Colonel Nicholson as opposed to maybe the performance, because he did win an Academy Award, so he had to have been somewhat good in his
good.
role.
He's pretty good. I think. It's really the linchpin to the whole story, isn't it? I mean, here's this guy who, as I mentioned before, there's this conflict. I think most of us would have. Do a good job. Pride in your work, pride in in being British and doing a good British job, or working against your own best interests. And what's interesting about him is there is no conflict. It's not a choice for him. He's going to build a proper bridge. And so at the beginning of the movie, as he's rallying the troops, and you can see the men really love Nicholson, he's the hero of the film. And what I find fascinating is by the end of the film, he's kind of the bad guy, as Holden and Jack Hawkins have that secret mission to go in and blow up the bridge, and he's the one who's going to foil it. And so he's the bad guy. So it's this strange hero anti-hero thing that's going on with the character, which is unusually complex, I think.
Yeah, he's the a lot of people they think that the character of Nicholson was based off of the real guy who was the British CEO of the camp.
Was his name Toucey or
Toucey? Yeah, Philip. He retired as a brigadier. Sir Philip Toucey was his name. Yes, and a lot of people feel that he was based off of that. The character of Guinness, and to a point that is very, very true. And Toucey was the complete 180-degree opposite of Nicholson in the movie, and so much so that when the movie was released, Toucey, who was very much alive, took great offense to it because he knew this is supposed to be a caricature of me, and it was not what he was about at all, like not even close. Because as opposed to Nicholson, who's doing everything he can to help the Japanese, who is a clear collaborator, who's doing everything he can to get this bridge built, Toucey was the opposite of that. He did everything he could to not get the bridge built. He encouraged his people, like you were saying, Josh, to sabotage things, to slow down, to do anything in your power without getting hurt to slow the process of the bridge. And his main objective, Toucey's main objective, was to keep his people alive. And which is, that's any commander's objective, obviously.
I think that's the important thing, is like looking at who the historical character would be, is that their job is to get enough work done to keep their men alive and in, you could call it the good graces of the Japanese. Whereas Nicholson, my interpretation of his character is he's kind of the classic stereotypical stiff old British officer, aristocracy, World War I, over the top, whistles, all that. But the other thing with him is I think he becomes a broken man. I think he actually just loses it because you see that right there at the end when he realizes, oh, crap, what have I done? And then he goes to blow up the bridge. He kind of like snaps out of it almost instantly. And that's kind of like my whole interpretation of his character, is it's not so much a like bad view on the British. It's the story of a man that snapped, and he's in command of everyone.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's not a bad view of the Brits at all, in my opinion. I mean, quite the opposite, frankly. It's just a bad view of this dude.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I remember reading that Pierre Boulle said it wasn't, when he wrote his novel, he wasn't basing it necessarily on Toucey. He was basing it on an amalgamation of French commanders who he witnessed while collaborating when he was a prisoner of war. Now, I don't know if he was saying that in reaction to an outrage over what Toucey said, and he was trying to maybe backtrack a little bit and say, oh, no, not you. Well, I wasn't talking about you, which very well maybe be the case. But I think it is worth pointing out that he has said it wasn't based on Toucey.
No, and you're right. You're 100% right. But from what I saw, his comments were made after the fact. After the fact, Toucey said, hold the phone. And Toucey's men, the survivors, came to his defense and said, no. That's not how he was.
Yeah.
This is not how the camp was. This is not how things were done. And I don't know if any of the survivors are still alive as of today. But I know the last one I saw something from was, I think, 2 years ago, and he was 97, and he still stood up for his CO then.
I mean, Nicholson is such a great character, but I do think, there were a couple of moments, even early on, before you start to see these signs, of madness, where I was like, what? Where, he's inspecting the bridge. Well, first of all, he talks about how, thanks to the Japanese, we're commanding a rabble. And, that was almost a bigger problem to him than actually being in the camp. Mm-hmm. It was like, oh, I have to command these hooligans now. And so he was all about the class system.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
And, and even when you see him coming up to inspect the bridge, how does he get there? He gets there on a rail car that's pushed by an enlisted man. He was being pushed up there on a rail car by an Allied POW, So, and with him, there were very clear distinctions between how officers needed to be treated, and that distinction was made by the Geneva Convention. Officers were not required to work. So those distinctions were in place, but he was an enforcer of that, and to the extreme, where it was about the class rather than about the people.
I mean, to your point, and that's where he runs afoul of Saito in Nicholson, of course, not Tusi. Let's be clear. That's where he runs afoul of Saito in the beginning of the movie. Anyhow, it's because Saito says your officers will work, and he says no, they will not. And something I need to clarify here, real quick, too, while we're on the topic, is that Japan never ratified the Geneva Convention. So,
interesting.
Germany did. Japan never did. And therefore, when they took their prisoners of war, they were like, Geneva, Schmeneva,
he's like,
I'll
refer to this book. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Use it for toilet paper is what are you going to use it for? And, and in reality, too, you're right. Officers did not. They were not, according to the Geneva Convention, were not required to work. But they did. They did because, how much of a morale killer would that be? You got all your enlisted guys out there literally slaving away while you sit there in the camp and, kick back and relax. That didn't happen. I'm not saying it didn't happen ever, because it may have. But in reality, those guys work just as hard as anybody else did. But that's a big thing in this movie.
I think it's interesting, too, is it's something that you can't really depict in a movie necessarily, but it is a complexity of all these camps, even though it is just a bunch of bamboo and stuff stacked in the woods and everything. You do have officers are forced to work, but they go on officer segregated work parties, and then there's officers that stay behind the camp and they're in charge of the messing facilities, and they're administrators, and they have to operate their own camp under Japanese supervision, and that supervision could be anywhere from a colonel to a private who's in charge of the camp. So there's this huge complex system there. And officers definitely didn't want to work, but don't have a choice at that point.
Who did? Who wants to go work out in the Burmese or the Thai jungle? Nobody.
I think also while we're talking about Nicholson, just to touch on the genius of Alec Guinness's performance, and I do think it's genius. The character is such an archetype, this stiff upper lip, ramrod straight back. But there's so much to his performance here that's not on the page. When the guys at the beginning come marching into the camp, whistling that happy tune, and you see him standing there, there's a pride with his chest bowed out. You know exactly what he's thinking, and then you can credit David Lean for this. They're whistling the tune in the camp, and then the score comes in. And I think Malcolm Arnold wrote a counter march to the march they were whistling, and it comes this full orchestral military march. And I almost feel like that's what Nicholson is hearing in his head.
Defeated but not beaten.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then the most genius scene is when he's finally dragged out of the oven. He can't even walk. And he's got a guy on each elbow dragging him. His feet are dragging behind him. And then he notices his men are watching. And so he shrugs off the guys who are carrying him, and he starts walking, and he's shaking out his legs, and then his back gets straighter. And it's this beautiful tracking shot. It's almost like an animated evolutionary chart where he goes from being stooped over to being fully erect and standing straight up and walking with some pride and purpose. That's not on the page. That's all Alec Guinness. And even he wasn't the first choice for the role. They toyed around with people like Laurence Olivier, Charles Laughton was a huge name at the time. Alec Guinness wasn't really that well known. He had worked with David Lean in a couple of pictures, a couple of Charles Dickens adaptations. I think he did Great Expectations and Oliver Twist. He was not just not a household name. He wasn't very known at all on this side of the Atlantic, but. And he even turned it down. And Laughton, after seeing the performance, he admitted one of the reasons he turned it down, whether or not he turned it down or was not allowed to come onto the picture by the insurance underwriters of the film because it was too unhealthy for a big guy like that. And it would also be unbelievable for such a robust person as Charles Laughton to be on the movie. But when he saw Guinness's performance, he admitted, I did not understand this character until I saw Guinness do it.
Yeah,
there really is something special, I think, about it. And like you said, he won the Academy Award, so obviously it's good. But I think it's even better than good. It's brilliant, and this is what catapulted Guinness to stardom, and I think rightfully so.
I agree. I mean, he's fantastic in it. He's just a despicable character.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, to his credit,
but he snapped, as Josh pointed out. He broke, and you're in a Japanese prison camp. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that any person would break.
But I think he was sort of despicable before he broke.
I
don't think so. Right?
Not despicable.
He was the hero
I mean, that's going. Despicable is going too far. But I think he was, just more about the rules than he was about anything else.
Classic stiff old school officer.
Yeah, and I don't find that very lovable. But I think.
I agree.
Yeah,
with you. I do.
that caused. Some of that madness.
There's another thing he does. It stuck out with me. I don't know if it means anything, but it was interesting to me when he's out inspecting the bridge there at the end, and he accidentally drops his cane into the water, and it's just sort of that was like to me is like he's just kind of losing grip on everything that was going on, and he drops it, and he's like, oh.
That riding crop that he had the whole movie.
Yeah, and then he just, that was a replacement one. The other one got snapped in half because if you look at it, it's all squiggly and everything. And it was just like, to me, that was kind of like a symbol because he was sitting there talking and then just
I didn't even notice
like
that.
Drops and loses control of it. Yeah, they will follow it all the way down, shoots off into the water, and he's just like, well, the boys put on a show and just kind of walks away.
I did not catch that.
It's stuck out to me.
Good catch. Well, while we're talking about characters, let's talk about some of the other ones. William Holden, who I love William Holden.
Huge star at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Alec Guinness wasn't well known, and I'm drawing a blank on the actor who played Saito.
Tetsuya Hayakawa.
Right. He had been a silent film star, and his star was declining by now because once talkies came about, people realized he really couldn't speak English very well. And so his career sort of dried up. He was perfect for this role. And he also, although Holden's role and the Saito role were both, just like Guinness's role, archetypes, I think he did something with it. When he's in the hut and he realizes that he's been defeated by Guinness's character, and he sort of breaks down and throws himself on the bed. I thought that was a really nice moment to shine. I don't think Holden really gets a whole lot of chance to do much with his character. He's sort of the roguish, Han Solo type character, which is probably appropriate since Obi-Wan Kenobi steals the show in this movie. But they really did need a big star for this movie because Guinness wasn't well known and Hayakawa wasn't well known, so they needed a big star. Bill Holden was the biggest star at the time. He was the Clooney of the day. They talked about maybe bringing Cary Grant in. Thought that he's a little too light for this. People are thinking romantic comedies. But I think he did a fine job in the role. There wasn't much there. It wasn't real juicy. And his one concession was he decided to take a profit-sharing deal on the film. I think he took a 5% profit-sharing deal, which set him up for life.
Good man.
Yeah,
good call.
A smart move.
Yeah. He's awesome. He's badass. I mean, he's good in just about anything he's in. I mean,
Stalag 17, which he won the Academy Award for, like 5 or 6 years before this one.
Sunset Boulevard. Good gravy. But I mean, he's awesome. But I mean, I agree with you, Mike. I don't think his character. I mean, at the end, you know, he's the catalyst to finish the job, if you will. But
he's still a cartoon. You know?
Yeah, it's not. There's no depth, and I mean, he's a. I don't know. He's kind of a joke, really.
I think he's just the action element that kind of makes it something more than just a documentary about
make it dashing
guys building the Fifth of Firth Bridge in Thailand. You know, it's. I think that's kind of, he ties a lot of this together, sort of the beginning, the end, and like fixing Nicholson's problem, so to speak.
Yeah.
Or at least giving Nicholson a chance for redemption.
His character also gave producers a good reason to get women into the film. They realized there was not a woman in the script, and they said, "How are we going to get? We got to put some women in this film." So they wrote, when he was recuperating after he escaped, they wrote a nurse to have
she's credited as
5-minute love interest. Yeah,
ridiculous.
And then they wrote in the young women who were carrying the gear on the mission,
the bearers.
So just have some pretty young girls carry. That was the only reason they were there, is because they felt like they needed to have.
That
women
was
in
the
film.
upside of a commando mission, is to have have a bunch of Thai girls putting your camouflage on it. I was like, well, what are we doing here?
I mean, Holden has a couple of good lines, like when he's talking to the nurse and he's like, oh, you give me all these things. You give me pills, you give me baths, you give me enemas, but all I really want is love, I mean, that's, he's got some great lines, but yeah, he's being sold as something he's not in the film. Like, even if you look at, the promotional material for the film, you see, him like kind of exploding, from the page, and that's not really.
Well, I mean, his character's a fake, is a fake too.
Yeah, I guess
he's an
that's
enlisted
kind of appropriate.
Yeah.
He claims to be a commander, and he's the farthest thing from a United States naval officer.
He's also the only one that really clearly expresses how disgruntled and upset they are about being in a POW camp. He's over the grave. He's really the only one that actually kind of clearly communicates that to the viewer.
But that's because he's the only one who's not British. The British stiff upper lip, and they'll carry on, keep calm and carry on throughout it all.
And he's mocking it, going, "This is ridiculous."
Yeah,
right, like how to die like a gentleman, how to die by the rules. His big speech.
Which I think is David Lean's point in the whole movie, is how ridiculous it all is. So I mean, I guess his character in that way is sort of the voice of the filmmaker. This is crazy what we're doing,
Especially for who?
Speaking of voices, Clifton, to me, is the voice of history. Because that guy, he's always going, in almost every scene you talk to him, he's basically going, are we really doing this? Like, are you really going to do this? Or at the end, he goes, I'm just going to watch from the hill. I'm not coming across the bridge. Actually, I kind of like what Clifton is communicating. He comes out there because he's defending them, because he doesn't want them all to get hurt or killed or anything at the beginning. But every single time he comes in, he's basically going like, are we really?
I think he's probably the audience surrogate. He's what we're supposed to be thinking.
Yeah.
He's the movie's conscience right there.
Yeah, he's just like, are we really doing this? Really?
Yeah. Well, let's. One of the big themes in the movie is as we were all talking about, the British way of doing things and the Japanese philosophies on that and warfare. Let's talk about the British and the Japanese philosophies on warfare as represented in the film. Kim, can you tackle that one?
Sure. I mean, we can start first, I guess, with the Japanese philosophy, right? The never surrender. So if you surrender, you are less than a dog. It is the most dishonorable act that you can commit. Absolutely. Is surrender. And I think that's accurately represented in the film. How the POWs are seen by the Japanese.
Well, Saito says that at the beginning, or to that effect, and not those exact words, but yeah. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, it's, but I think Saito's speech is a good kind of representation of that. It's like, you guys are really nothing to us, and we're going to get this work done. The British view, you don't get a lot of their view on war except for what Nicholson is, kind of pushing onto his troops. So I don't know if you get a great view of how the British felt about fighting or surrendering or anything. They were just kind of living in the moment, working on this bridge and supporting their colonel.
Well, I think Saito gives the audience and I mean, you get it too, I think, by watching Nicholson, as we've said, it's and it's totally not what the British view of warfare is, but it's as you said, Mike, it's almost cartoonish. And that, the British were not, let's do this no matter what. We will build this bridge and leave our mark on society. No, that's not, that wasn't it. They weren't any different than we were. We being Americans, once they were prisoners of war, they were, as I said, trying to do their utmost to sabotage any effort to get that bridge built, and the railway as well, with it still staying alive. But the Japanese view, Kim, as you said, 100% right. The Japanese viewed prisoners of war as the lowest of the low. I mean, they had, they viewed, as you said, animals in a higher regard than prisoners of war, Allied prisoners of war. And in this particular episode, the movie, and this is something I wanted to talk about, the movie does not show that at all, hardly. I mean, they talk about it. Saito says that.
They talk about it, I guess, yeah.
But there's nothing showed about, in regards to the torture or be it physical or mental.
There's
or
almost no
anything else.
beatings in it.
No, and these guys were beaten like dogs.
Yeah, there's no wholesale beating. There's no discipline, anything like that.
There certainly is, though, implied cruelty. I mean, you know that it's not a good place to be. It's not a nice place to be.
Sure, yeah.
So I don't even think they had. If they wanted to be, extremely honest with it, obviously they'd show it. But I don't think they had to show it. I think they implied it well enough that this was a nasty place and that you were not going to do well. Again, through those graves, the graves they showed at the beginning and the graves that Bill Holden's character is digging.
I think, and it's like I am only able to look at it through the lens of history. And so it bothers me when I don't see people getting smacked around to really show exactly what they had to deal with. But I do agree with you. They do a good job setting it because it's very primitive. You just get a good idea of conditions. There's a lot of symbols, graves right next to everything, and you get that. And the only other thing with the Japanese kind of sticks out with me is you do get this sort of up and down treatment, some good, some bad, which you get that in other segments of the war, but you get one decent part of treatment, which is Holden interacting with the Japanese captain who's overseeing that burial detail, and he, gives him the lighter, and he's like, "Oh, okay, you guys are good. I'll put you on the sick list," But then the next day he could be a total jerk to him, and so I thought that was nice to see that up and down a little bit, but mostly bad.
By the end, you pretty much have forgotten that scene. I'm like, well, yeah, I forgot about that. But I think, Seth, there's another film that I think we've discussed before, The Railway Man.
Mm-hmm.
And so, also kind of a similar subject, work on the Thai-Burma Railroad. And it is violent to the extreme. Almost
but accurate.
But it is extremely brutal, graphic, difficult to watch, almost, this in a hardcore way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the other extreme, which I don't know if that would have been possible at the time. And in that setting, at least in Hollywood.
Yeah. It's hard to say whether or not, anything's possible in movies, right, Mike?
Yeah,
that's
indeed.
the truth,
For better or for worse.
Right. But and I know we've kind of drilled this film pretty hard about being accurate as far as history is concerned. In fact, it's not. But, so I guess in that regard, we could say, it fits with the rest of the theme of the movie, is that it's not showing the accurate treatment. But if you're going to do something like this, I think you should. You should show the accurate treatment of Allied prisoners of war at the hands of the Japanese.
But was that something that they really could do in 1957? Is that something where they got
like a 5-minute waterboarding scene?
Yeah, that's
I
Kim's
don't
point.
know.
But I don't know. I don't like it. Don't like it at all. So the happy tune that they're whistling, everybody knows it.
Colonel Bogey's March.
Yeah, we're not going to do it now because we'll blow Jeremy's ears out on the other end of the microphones here. But the Colonel Bogey's March, that has become one of the most famous whistling tunes in history.
Right.
Mike, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I joked at the beginning of the movie that the bridge is the main character of the movie, but that tune is the more enduring character of the movie, I think. That's the tune that everybody knows. Everybody sang in some form or another. And, when the movie came, do you remember Comet? It makes your teeth turn green. Do you remember that? I knew that before. I never ever knew what this the bridge on the River Kwai was. But when the movie came out, of course, American audiences had never known that. It was just a fine military beat for them. But it dates back to 1914, 1912. Someone wrote it as a military march, a guy named, I think, Kenneth Alford. And it actually, the title is related to golf. From what I understand, back in the old days, par was actually a bogey. They called it a bogey when you hit par. And so British people playing golf were said to be chasing Colonel Bogey. And so then that's where the title comes from, as I understand it. And the British knew this song very well. In fact, in World War II, there's some well-known naughty lyrics questioning the anatomical shortcomings of certain Nazi leadership.
I read those lyrics. They're pretty awesome.
That's the only thing I sing when I hear this song. I don't actually. That's the thing that's going through my head. A bunch of British kids singing it.
One of my favorite rhymes in all of rhymedom is
rhymedom.
Himmler has something similar. Yeah. That's the only part of that song that I'll sing. People can Google it at home if they want to find all the lyrics. But
it's awesome.
But when they were putting the movie together, David Lean needed to find some sort of song that expressed that these British soldiers could express their Britishness with and their unity, and they could, march in formation, and that very powerful scene, as I said in the beginning, when Nichols is standing there with his chest puffed out, and they were thinking, what can we use? What can we use? And then somebody brought in, I think it was described as they wanted to basically give the finger to the Japanese leadership. And so somebody said, well, let's use Colonel Bogey's March, because everybody in Britain knew that song, knew those naughty lyrics questioning Nazi leadership, and they thought, perfect shorthand for British audiences to know that they're not only are they proud of being British, but they're being defiant. They're poking an eye in the Axis leadership's eye, and so they put that in there. And I think the guy who wrote it, Alfred, he'd passed away by then. His widow was still alive, and she got royalties. They decided to incorporate it, and then they incorporated that countermarch that I mentioned earlier so beautifully into it that I think it's probably one of the most memorable musical motifs in movie history.
It certainly sets the pace.
Right.
Introduces you to the unit, sets the pace for the movie. It's big.
Yeah, and then it keeps recurring throughout, and then when you're done, you're whistling it when you're walking out the theater.
Especially
awesome,
the little
too.
Tiny subtle, just do, just hear it randomly in the movie.
It's awesome, like you said. I mean, that scene when they're coming in, I mean, it is very powerful, and then it's showing, as you said, unity and pride. And that's another part where they're doing the instep march, where they're just standing there and they're just they're marching.
Their shoes are falling off their feet.
Yeah.
The ones who even have shoes.
Yeah, I was going to say that they have close in shots of these guys, their feet moving, and some of them don't have shoes. Some of them, their feet are wrapped up in bloody bandages and filthy bandages, and their shoes are falling, boots are falling apart, and they're raggedy.
And as compared to the guys in the beginning who you mentioned earlier, who are swinging a pickaxe with no energy and with no zeal, compared to these guys drilling, whistling that song, because that meant something to them. I think it's, this movie, this is a long movie, 2 hours and 45 minutes, but I think there's some really good examples of efficient storytelling. And that one scene right there is, I think, beautifully efficient, without a word, just some whistling. It told its own story.
Powerful.
It really was.
It's awesome, but again, I have to question the authenticity of it, because that's what we're here to do, is that in reality, those guys marched 200 miles through the jungle. Well, they would have marched 200 miles through the jungle to get to that camp. So by the time they'd have gotten there, they damn sure weren't whistling.
Right.
They were still walking.
I read a great review of that scene by a POW, and he just said we were too frappin' tired to whistle. So he didn't say frappin', though. They're going 10, 20-mile force marches overnight.
Yeah. And that tune, if anybody has ever been a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout and you've ever gone to summer camp, you have whistled that tune. I did. I mean, over and over and over again, and it's just one of those things that sticks in your head.
I've been whistling it for the past 3 days since I rewatched this movie.
It's going through my head right about now. We can't talk about this film without talking about what an ordeal it was to make.
Indeed.
So, Mike,
yeah, I mean,
lay it on us.
Anytime you're shooting in a jungle, right, it's going to be problematic. And they needed to shoot in a jungle, not just because that's where it's set. Also, David Lean he had some financial reversals just before this movie. He had a divorce and was going broke, and for tax reasons, he didn't want to go back to England. So, in fact, the movie, after they even shot it, they edited it in Paris because I think he had to stay away from England for a year or two for whatever, I don't know what tax reasons that was. But so they decided to scout it out, and they shot in present-day Sri Lanka, Ceylon, then, and they were out in the middle. They were out in the middle of nowhere to find the right river, the right where they could build a bridge, and then they built that bridge. They actually built the bridge out there. There were crews out there for like 10 months, from beginning to end, from when they started to build the bridge to when production wrapped. So it was a huge production just to do that. And then, so you're going to have the problems that you'd expect in the jungle. William Holden, as I understand, had got a tick bite that sort of bothered his knee for years afterwards. There was a Jeep wreck at one point that actually killed a crew member and injured 2 others. And then not only did they build the bridge, they actually built a dam upriver, because in that climactic final sequence, when you see the wires, they can see the wires of the explosives that they strung up the night before. They didn't want to just kind of string a wire out, on the little branch outside of the water. They really wanted that water to drop so you'd see it on the beach. And so they built a dam upriver and dammed it off so they could toy with so this was an immense undertaking. And then once they get out there, David Lean, even though he had worked twice before with Alec Guinness, they did not get along very well together on this set. Alec Guinness had a very specific way that he wanted to play Nicholson. David Lean had other ideas, and they were bumping heads so much that when it was time for Guinness to wrap and leave and for William Holden to come in, David Lean expressed, "Oh, thank goodness I get to work with an American." He said, "I'm tired of these British guys. I want to work with..." And then William Holden gets on set, and I guess this is another, I said he was sort of the Clooney of his day. He was also a bit of a prankster. He bought a monkey at one point, as I understand it, and would kind of had his pet monkey on set. At one point jumps on the producer Sam Spiegel's back, and so he says, "Don't move, Sam, don't move." And Spiegel's freaking out, and somebody goes and reaches for a gun to shoot the monkey because he had bitten 2 other people, at which point Spiegel says, "No, stop, wait," because obviously he's going to get hit. Anyway, I guess they got the monkey off of Spiegel. And then apparently Holden was fascinated with fireworks, which, who isn't? Mm-hmm. They go into town one day. He sees fireworks in a store and buys them all, and he would put on regular fireworks shows, which, I guess when you're out there in the middle of the jungle, that's entertaining enough. And then one day, one night during one of his shows, a burning piece of firework starts drifting toward the bridge that they had just spent 8 months building. And so then you had a rush to get to it and put it out before the bridge actually burns down, which they did manage to save. And then finally they get to the big finale when they're going to blow up the bridge. They're going to drive the train across the bridge and blow up the bridge. At first, when they were first building the bridge, there wasn't going to be a train to go across it until one was donated to them by the government. And so they said, "Well, holy mackerel, we got a train. We got to let a train go on the bridge and blow it up." So they had to reinforce the bridge. They shoot the train across the bridge. The train's almost all the way across the bridge, and the explosive haven't gone off because nobody told the explosives guy. He never got his cue. The train goes to the other side of the bridge and crashes into a generator. So they gotta reset. And even in a simple movie, resetting and doing a retake takes forever. I can imagine on this one, it took even. And I guess they had to also kind of put the train back into shape. They run it back over the bridge. They blow up the bridge. They get it on camera. Everything works great. They wrap the picture. They go fly home, and they lost the film of the bridge blowing up, of the train crashing, which is a brilliant scene. It's up there to me with...
It's one of the most iconic scenes in movie history.
It reminds me of Buster Keaton's The General, when it's another scene where a train is crashing in the middle of a bridge, and they couldn't find the print. They didn't know where it was. And it turned out that there was some confusion on shipping it home, and it had been sitting in a plane on a tarmac for days or weeks. And from what I understand, it should have been destroyed, but they went ahead and they wound it up and processed it, and lo and behold, there was their film. But there was no sound. The sound engineer, somehow, there was some confusion. They didn't get the sound for it, so they ended up using some stock sound of train crashes, which, if you watch it, it actually matches up pretty perfectly.
A little extra burst of steam at the end.
Yeah. So you had all these different headaches going on, but I think in the end, all's well that ends well, right?
Damn sound engineers.
I think that's what's amazing about that movie is you can tell that just by what you're told, the quality and depth of work they put in it shows in a very beautiful, epic, dramatic film. I mean, it's like it's hard to find something in there that looks cheaply done.
David Lean was known to be meticulous, and they essentially had to just drag him home because there was always one more shot he wanted to get. And so I think that meticulous nature shows through in just when what you say, just the quality of every shot.
He did Lawrence of Arabia, didn't he?
He did. After this, he did Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, both of which are beautiful,
27
epic
hours
films.
long each. So I could see where he wanted to get one more shot.
But that whole ordeal kind of led me to see David Lean as Nicholson.
That's interesting.
Like complete obsessive. Yeah. He is going to have to be dragged out of this jungle because he is going to build this film.
That's I didn't think of that, but that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap this sucker up. Kim, did caught you off guard? Did you like this film, and would you recommend it?
I did like this film. I would recommend it. It's a classic. It's beautiful. Spielberg said he watches this movie every time before he goes to make a film. So, it's you could see something new in it every time. It's long,
it's long.
Which I also said about The Great Escape. And I think this is not as long as The Great Escape.
But it seems longer.
But
than
it's,
the
I
Great
know, it does.
It
yeah.
does. It really does.
So, but yes.
Mike?
I disagree that it feels longer than The Great Escape. I love this movie. This movie is a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. This is a movie that I was turned on to early in my movie watching career and loved it then, and have revisited it every decade or so, and I always love it. And it is a long movie. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes. And I always find myself coming on the podcast and talking about how much I don't like long movies, but I'm starting to think maybe I do like long movies,
Maybe so.
because just like with The Dirty Dozen, that's a good movie, Kelly's Heroes. And this one as well. I really, really enjoy this movie from beginning to end. And I feel like it's, like I said, it sounds funny to call a 2 hour and 45 minute film efficient. I think there's some really efficient storytelling in here. The performance by Alec Guinness in particular is fantastic. And, we talked about the truth adjacentness of it. That didn't bother me. I got just a feeling for a time and place. If not, it's not a documentary, but I did get sort of a general vibe. And I am very fond of this movie. And I highly recommend it.
Joshua?
Same thing, I really like this movie. I would really recommend it. It's beautiful, great acting. History. Josh is like, not that accurate, but as far as just being entertaining, which is what I think movies for the most part should be, wonderful.
Yeah, I would agree and disagree. I think historically, no, I would never recommend this movie because it's not historically accurate at all. The history Seth is saying no. Mm-hmm. But as a film, it's a good movie. Mm-hmm. It is. It's a good movie. It's, as everybody said here, it's beautifully shot. It is long, and I do feel it is longer than The Great Escape, even though it's not. But it does keep your interest. It certainly does keep your interest for the vast majority of it. I don't necessarily care for William Holden's character in it. I just think he's kind of Mm-hmm. But Alec Guinness is fantastic. Hayakawa is really good in this movie. He's really good. He's a perfect guy to play. Well, Saito in actuality was a sergeant, but the perfect guy to play the CO of the camp. It's a good movie. It's a good movie. I would definitely recommend it. If you're going to watch it for historical value, don't. But if you're going to watch it just because it is a classic, and it is, heck yeah. It's a good movie to sit down and with a massive box of popcorn because it's going to take you a while.
And just plan on whistling Colonel Bogey's March for the next few days.
Yeah, man, for days. Final thoughts, Josh, wrap it up.
Great Hollywood, terrible history.
And like I said, it's a masterpiece. I love this film.
Kim?
It's all about extremes.
Indeed. Thank you, Kim.
Long.
Obsessive characters, obsessive filmmaking.
All right. Well, I'll wrap it up like I generally do with a quote, and this one is from William Holden's character, and I think it summarizes his character and, in a way, the POW experience in the Pacific just a little bit. And it goes like this. It says, Here lies Corporal Herbert Thompson, serial number 01234567, valiant member of the King's Own and Queen's Own or something, who died of beriberi in the year of our Lord 1943, for the greater glory of... What did he die for? I don't mock the grave or the man. May he rest in peace. He found little enough of it while he was alive. So thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more about the events we discussed today, tune in to our mini episode next week. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate and review us on iTunes and Stitcher if you like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, our producer Tessa Jager, and our sound engineer Jeremy Burson. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.